Yo, what's going on, guys? Dirca Monster here, and we're back with another Dirca deck tech, where we take a look at one of my many commander decks, and we go over it based on my preference in how I build and how I play the deck. And today, we're going to be taking a look at my Venser Proliferate deck. So, Venser Corpse Puppet is a 2-mana, a blue and a black, so Demir, for a 1/3 Phyrexian zombie wizard. He's got lifelink, meaning whenever he deals combat damage, or actually whenever he deals damage, not just combat damage, you gain that much life. Then he has Toxic 1, meaning whenever you deal combat damage to a player, that player receives 1 poison counters. Poison counters are these right here, and a player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game on the spot. Now, Venser also says that when you proliferate, if you don't control a Hollow Sentinel, which is this token right here, this 3/3 legendary Phyrexian Golem artifact creature, if you don't have one, you make one. And if you already have one, a artifact creature you control gets flying and lifelink. Now, the goal of this deck is to poison the opponent out, or all the opponents out, and by getting at least 1 poison counter on them in some way, shape, or form, and proliferating them to death. And in order to do that, we have a handful of options. So for poison counters, we have things like Prologue to Pheresis. This is a 2-mana spell, 1 and a blue, for an instant speed. Each opponent gets a poison counter, and you draw a card. We also have Infectious Inquiry, 3 mana, sorcery. You draw 2 cards, you lose 2 life, each opponent gets a poison counter. And then we also have Vraska's Fall, 3 mana for an instant speed spell. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker and gets a poison counter. And lastly, the nuclear option, Ichor Rats. 3 mana for a 2/1 Phyrexian Rat with Infect, meaning whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, it deals that much damage in -1 counters, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they get that many poison counters. And when it enters the battlefield, each player gets a poison counter. That includes yourself. So not only do we have those for poison, but we also have a few ways to essentially combo out to get our proliferate should we assemble a combo. Now, one of them requires us to have our Venser on the field, and ideally his Hollow Sentinel. But it can be any other artifact to start this. And then we'll have Throne of Gath and Draw Scorpion. So this combo works is we have Throne of Gath, a 2-mana artifact that says tap this, sacrifice an artifact, and proliferate. And we have Draw Scorpion, which is a 4-mana 3/1 artifact creature that says whenever this or another artifact creature is put into the graveyard from play, untap target artifact. So the way you do this is you tap the Throne of Gath and you sacrifice the Hollow Sentinel. And the Draw Scorpion says, hey, an artifact went to the graveyard. Go ahead and untap an artifact. We'll choose this one. We'll resolve this tap effect and we'll proliferate. Venser says, hey, we don't have a Hollow Sentinel. Make a Hollow Sentinel. And you've proliferated once. You then tap this to sacrifice this. This untaps this. Proliferate. He says make another one. And you've proliferated a second time. A third, a fourth, a fifth, and so on and so forth. Now, we also have a few other ways to do these things. A great thing to proliferate over and over again with is the Magistrate's Scepter. This is a 3-mana artifact that says pay 4 mana, tap it, and put a charge counter on it. And you can tap it and remove 3 charge counters to take an extra turn. Now, a great way to do this is with things like Contagion Engine, the 6-mana artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, put a -1 counter on each creature target player controls, so effectively can be used to board wipe. And then for 4 mana, this is the important part, you can tap it and proliferate, and then proliferate again. And speaking of proliferate again, we have Tekkathal. This is a 4-mana, 2 blue for a 3/5 legendary Phyrexian horror with flying, and the main thing is it says if you would proliferate twice instead. So you get the 4 mana to put the counters on this. You take the 4 mana and you activate your Contagion Engine. You're going to take the 1 counter and proliferate it, but this says proliferate twice, so your 1 goes to 2, goes to 3, and then you have a second proliferate, and Techathel says do it again, so 3 goes to 4, goes to 5. You tap it, remove 3, you still have 2, and you take an extra turn. And then you repeat this process as many turns as you like. Another great thing to use with the the Magistrate Scepter is Viral Drake. We have lots of ways to generate lots and lots of mana in this deck, and Viral Drake is a 4 mana creature, 3 and a blue for a 1/4 Drake with Flying and Infect, but mainly, the important part is it says for 4 mana, 3 and a blue, proliferate. So as long as we can keep generating the mana, we can keep on proliferating. And again, Techathel with this goes pretty hard. Now, we also, let me organize some of these things back over here. We also have a backup plan if our poison plan doesn't work. We have the Scheming Aspirant. This is a 2 mana creature for a 1 and a black. It's a 1/3 Phyrexian Advisor. And it says if you would proliferate, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So these infinite loops of proliferation that we find can actually end the game without being without everybody being poisoned. And then from there, we're going to take a look at our various ways to proliferate. So first of all, we have the Contagion Engine. Contagion Clasp. This is the mini engine. 2 mana for an artifact that when it enters the battlefield, put a -1 and -1 counter on target creature. And then for 4 mana, you can proliferate. We also have Vraska, Betrayal Sting. This is a 6 mana planeswalker. 4 black, but that second one is a Phyrexian black, meaning you could pay 2 life or the black mana. And if you pay the 6 mana, it comes down with 6 loyalty. But if you use the 2 life clause on that black mana, it actually comes down on 4 loyalty. And the number one thing we do with this is for 0, it says draw a card, lose a life, and proliferate. So not only is it card draw, but it's proliferation. And then you can -2 to turn a creature into a treasure token with no abilities and no other types. So effectively just removal. And then the -9 says target player basically goes up to 9 poison counters. Regardless of how many they had, it becomes 9. And then we also have the Staff of Completion. This is a very fun card that I like quite a bit. This is a 3 mana artifact. You can pay 1 life and tap it to destroy a target permanent you own. Not sure why you would do that, but it's an option. You can tap it and pay 2 life to add 1 mana of any color. Pretty good. The most important part for us, pay 3 life to proliferate. Or you can pay 4 life to draw a card, and then you can pay 5 mana to untap it. And as we stated, we have lots of ways to generate lots of mana, so this is another way to get quite a lot of proliferation going. But probably the strongest one is going to be Flux Channeler. This is a 3 mana creature, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you proliferate. That's instant, sorcery, enchantment, artifact, planeswalker, battle. There's lots of options. Anything that's not a creature. Next up, we have Thrumming Bird. This is a 2 mana creature, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 with flying. It's a Phyrexian bird horror. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. And then we have Vivisurgent's Insight. This is a 5 mana spell, 3 blue for a sorcery. Draw 3 cards and proliferate. Similar to that, we have the Tezzeret's Gambit. This is 3 and a Phyrexian blue. And you can pay 2 life for that blue, or you can pay 4 mana total. Draw 2 cards and then proliferate. And we have Contentious Plan, 1 and a blue for a sorcery, proliferate and draw a card. And then with a 1 minute increase for instant speed, we have Proliferate and draw a card in steady progress. Then we have Whisper of the Dross. This is a 1 black instant speed spell that says target creature gets -1/-1 till end of turn and Proliferate. And the bigger version, Drown a Nicker, 2 mana, 1 and a black for a sorcery. Target creature gets -4/-4 until end of turn, and then Proliferate. We also have the Vat Emergence. This is 5 mana, 4 and a black for a sorcery. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and then Proliferate. It doesn't have to be from your graveyard, it could be anybody's. And then we also have the Experimental Augury, or Better Anticipate in this case. 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant speed spell. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, and the rest of the bottom in any order, and Proliferate. And then we have Serum Snare. 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant speed. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If it was mana value 3 or less, Proliferate. And finally, we have the Reject Imperfection. 1 blue for an instant counter target spell. If its mana value was 3 or less, Proliferate. And then we also have our removal package, starting with one of my favorite cards, Murder. 1 black, 3 mana for an instant destroy target creature. And then we have Anoint with Affliction. Now this is a little bit of a complicated card to say out loud, but effectively it says for 1 and a black, instant speed, exile target creature if its mana value was 3 or less. If that creature's controller had 3 or more poison counters, it doesn't matter what the mana value is, you can exile any creature as long as its controller has 3 or more poison counters. Simple to use, hard to explain. And then we have Shieldred's Edict, 1 and a black for an instant, choose 1. Each opponent sacrifices either a non-token creature, a creature token, or a planeswalker. And then we have Aetherize, 4 mana, 3 and a blue for an instant, return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. And then we move on to our counters. We have the most underrated card, I think, in all of Counterspells, Void Shatter. 1 blue, 3 mana, instant, devoid, meaning this spell is colorless. It's not a blue spell, so you can't red elemental blast this one. Counter target spell, and instead of putting it in the graveyard, exile it. And then we have Dismiss, 4 mana, 2 blue for an instant counter target spell, and draw a card. One of my favorite cards, Summary Dismissal. 2 blue instant, exile all other spells, and counter all abilities. You have a bunch of things on the stack that are going to kill you, cast Summary Dismissal, and suddenly you're still alive. And finally, we have Clash of Wills, X and a blue, instant speed, counter target spell unless its controller pays X. And then we also have quite a lot of card draw in the deck to try to keep us going. Starting with things like Reckoner Bankbuster. This is a 2 mana artifact. It's a vehicle, and it enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters on it. You can pay 2 mana and tap it to remove a charge counter and draw a card. When you do this, if it has 0 counters left, you would make a treasure token, and you would make a pilot creature token. And the pilot says, essentially, I can crew vehicles for 3 power, even though I'm a 1 power, for 2 more power. And then its crew is for 3, meaning if you tap creatures with total value power of 3, you turn this into a 4/4 creature. And then we have the Etched Oracle. This is a 4 mana creature, an artifact wizard. It has Sunburst, meaning it enters the battlefield with a +1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. Now, normally in a blue-black deck, we would only be able to do 2. However, we have multiple ways to generate mana of any color, so we can get it up to the 4 if possible. And then you can pay 1 mana and remove 4 +1 counters on it, and target player draws 3 cards. Once you have a pretty solid engine lined up, this is a great way to keep the cards flowing in. Then we have one of the most wordy cards in the deck, Kaito Dancing Shadow. 4 mana, 2 blue-black for a 3 loyalty planeswalker, and he says, if a creature you control would deal combat damage to a player, you can return that creature to your hand, and if you do, you can activate loyalty abilities of this planeswalker twice instead of once. The +1, target creature can't attack or block until your next turn, so solid protection. The most commonly used one for us, 0, draw a card. And then -7, let me make sure I get this, or not -7, it's -2. But it looked like a 7. It's got a lot of words on it and I never use it. Create a 2/2 colorless drone artifact creature token with Death Touch. And whenever this creature leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. That's a fancy way to make yourself a blocker. It's not a scary planeswalker for a lot of people because it doesn't have an ultimate, it doesn't do anything crazy. It essentially either makes a token, draws a card, or stops something from attacking or blocking. For me, it's usually just draw a card. And then we have the classic in its new printing, Phyrexian Arena. This is 3 mana, 1 black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you draw a card and you lose a life. And then we have the Distorted Curiosity, 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. This spell costs 2 less to cast if any of your opponents have 3 or more poison counters. And then you draw 2 cards. So essentially this is 1 mana, draw 2, but we don't mind doing the 3 because sometimes you just got to draw those cards. Now, one of the cards that when it works, when it doesn't, is Overflowing Insight. 7 mana, 4 blue. So I had to make sure my math was right there. 3 blue and 4. Target player draws 7 cards and it's a sorcery. That's a full grip, but ooh man. Speaking of a full grip, you can get one with Pull from Tomorrow. This is X blue instant. Draw X cards and then discard a card. Now, we have a semi-large amount of utility in this deck. Just things to help us get there and do lots of different things. Starting with Voidwing Hybrid. This is a 2 mana, blue-black, 2/1 Phyrexian Bat. It's got Flying and Toxic 1. And then when you proliferate, return this card from your graveyard to your hand. That's the important part, is that it's a continual chump blocker. It's a great card to discard when you need to. It's recursive and annoying, but it is one of the cards I would eventually cut for some upgrades. Speaking of which, we have Mercurial Spelldancer. This is a 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Phyrexian Rogue. It cannot be blocked. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you put an oil counter on this. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you can remove 2 oil counters. And if you do, copy the next instant or sorcery you play this turn. You may choose new targets for the copy. Speaking of a card that I would probably cut for some of the upgrades I want to put in, we have Archfiend of the Dross. This is 4 mana, 2 black for a 6/6 Phyrexian Demon with Flying. When it enters the battlefield, it enters with 4 oil counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, remove an oil counter. If there's no oil counters on it, you lose the game. However, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, its controller loses 2 life. Kind of a neat card. It makes sense to put in here because you can keep it alive for a long time. It's a fairly large effect for what it is, but for one of the couple upgrades, it'll probably be the replacement. or what I replace. Then we have Sculpting Steel. This is a 3-mana artifact. It enters the battlefield as a copy of a target artifact that's in play at the moment. I don't believe you have to control it. This is an older printing, but I don't believe you do. Next up, we have a similar card, Mirage Mockery. 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Choose one. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact you control, or create a token that's a copy of target artifact, or I'm sorry, non-artifact creature you control, or you can entwine it and do both for 6 total mana. So either make a token that's a copy of a creature, or make a token that's a copy of an artifact creature. Brain is broken. You can make a token of a artifact creature or non-artifact creature, or you can pay 6 to do both. That's essentially what I was trying to say there. And then one of the things to help us cast lots of these big spells is Mind Splice Apparatus. 4 mana, 3 and a blue for an artifact with flash, meaning you can cast it at any point on any phase or any turn, as long as you have priority. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on it. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less for each oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus, making it so that the Overflowing Insight is a lot more appealing when it's not 7 mana but closer to 3. And then we have Soul Guide Lantern, one of my favorite ways to deal with graveyards. It's a 1 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard. And then you can tap it and sacrifice it. Exile each opponent's graveyard, or in a pinch, you can pay 1 mana, tap it, sack it, and draw a card. And then we have Tezzeret the Schemer. This is a 4 mana, 2 blue-black Planeswalker with 5 loyalty, and you can +1 create a token colorless artifact creature. It's a Servo, right? Oh no, it's a Ethereum Cell. That's what it is. Create a colorless artifact creature token named Ethereum Cell with tap it, sacrifice it, and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Essentially, it's a treasure with a different name. And then -2 target creature gets -X on turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. And then -7, you get an emblem with at the beginning of combat on your turn, target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 5/5. Now, more often than not, we're using it for either mana or removal. Typically, we take it up and just get free mana, but once we've got a bunch of things on the field, we can use it as removal. One of the most powerful cards that's in the deck is this here, Archmage Ascension. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if you drew 2 or more cards this turn, put a quest counter on this enchantment. As long as it has 6 or more quest counters on it, whenever you would draw a card, instead search your library for that card and shuffle it, add that card to your hand and shuffle. Essentially, this turns your draws into tutors, which is bonkers. Now, you have to draw 2 cards for 6 turns, or other players' turns and whatnot, but not really, because we're a Proliferate deck. So once we get 1 counter on there, we can usually turn that up pretty quickly. And then we have Silas Wren, Secret Adept, 3 mana, 1 blue-black for a 2/2 legendary artifact creature human with Death Touch. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, choose target artifact card from your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. And it has partner if it was relevant, but currently it's not. This is a great way to get some of our combo pieces back and some of our major mana producers. Speaking of which, we also have our given Restoration, 4 mana, 2 blue for a sorcery. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And then another great way to get things going is one of my favorite cards, Leyline of Anticipation. 4 mana, 2 blue for an enchantment. If it's in your opening hand, you can start the game with it on the battlefield, so a pre-game effect. And you may cast non-land cards as though they had flash, giving all of your cards instant speed except lands. And the last thing in the utility package is just Diabolic Tutor. This is a 4 mana, 2 black sorcery. Search the library for a card, put it into your hand, and shuffle. Great way to get the remaining pieces of any of the combo you need, or to get an answer to something you desperately need. And worst case scenario, it's a great way to get a land. Now, we've talked about it a lot, but there are lots of artifacts that make lots of mana in this deck. Starting with Overflowing Chalice. For 0 mana, this is an artifact with multi-kicker of 2, and it enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it for each time it was kicked. So you could pay 0 for the artifact, but every instance of 2 mana you pay into it as you're casting it puts a charge counter on it. And then you can tap it and add 1 mana to your mana pool for each charge counter on it. We can start it with 1, so it's a 2 mana artifact that taps for 1, and every time we proliferate, it gets bigger and bigger. Similarly, we have Astral Cornucopia, XXX for an artifact, enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. Tap it, choose a color, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia. So 3 mana gets you 1 charge counter, and from there we can just proliferate it up and up and up and up and up. It doesn't make multi-colors of mana, just 1, but it can generate quite a lot. Probably one of the absolute best ways to produce mana in the deck, though, has got to be Pintad Prism. This is a 2 mana artifact with Sunburst, and this one we absolutely can just do blue-black to put 2 charge counters on it, and then you can remove a charge counter to add 1 mana of any color. Of note, unlike everything else we've talked about, this does not tap to do this ability. It just removes counters. So if you add a counter, you can remove a counter constantly. Add a bunch, remove a bunch. Store it up, remove it all at once. That's absolutely bonkers, and I love it. Then we have Replicating Ring. I have never once in a game actually seen this ability go off. However, I feel like this would be the one time this would be a reasonable way for that to happen. So this is a 3 mana artifact, and it's a snow artifact as well. Tap it, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a night counter on this, and then if it has 8 or more night counters when you resolve this ability, remove all of them and create 8 colorless artifact snow tokens named Replicating Ring that all add 1 mana of any color. So essentially, you can get 9 artifacts for the price of 1. You just got to get a whole bunch of night counters on them, or on this one. And then, because we're a Proliferate deck, it's actually pretty relevant that you might actually be able to pull that off. Again, I've never seen it happen in a game, but there's always hoping. And then we have the last of our counter-esque artifacts, Coalition Relic. 3 mana for an artifact. You can tap it to add 1 mana of any color, or you can tap it and put a charge counter on it. At the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, remove all charge counters on it, and add 1 mana of any color for each charge counter removed this way. So, if you tap it, put a charge counter on it, and you proliferate a whole bunch of times, untap, go to your main phase, and bada bing, bada boom, get a whole bunch of mana back. And as far as mana rocks that don't require or don't interact with counters in Proliferation, we have Soul Ring, 1 mana for a artifact that adds 2 mana to your mana pool. Arcane Signet, 2 mana for an artifact that adds 1 mana of any color in your color identity to your mana pool. In this case, blue or black. Talisman of Dominance, 2 mana for an artifact that either adds colorless or you could pay 1 life to add 1 black or 1 blue. Effectively, it's not paying a life, it deals damage to you. There is a difference. Dimir Signet, 2 mana for an artifact you can filter, meaning you can pay 1 mana, tap this to add blue-black. And then last and kind of least, my least favorite printing of a card. I would really love to replace this with the original printing instead, but I work with what I got. Decanter of Endless Water, 3 mana artifact. You have no maximum hand size. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And from there, we take a look at our lands. Some of our lands have counters on them and interact very, very well with Proliferate. Starting with probably the scariest land I've ever seen, because this thing is surprisingly potent. Dreadship Reef adds colorless, or you could pay 1 and tap it to put a charge counter on it. Most importantly, though, you don't have to tap it to do this next ability. Pay 1 mana and remove X charge counters and add X mana in any combination of blue or black. That's insane, because that means you can use this land multiple times. If you're using it and proliferating with that mana you're removing, you can then do it again. It's actually quite insane once you see it going. I realized that I don't have to tap it to do this ability one time, and the whole world opened up. It was wild. And then similarly, not nearly as powerful, is Majoring Network. This one you can tap for colorless. You can pay 1, tap it, put a charge counter on it. And then you can tap it and remove any number of, I'm sorry, they're not charge counters, they're storage counters. You can remove any number of storage counters on it and add 1 colorless for each storage counter removed this way. And then we have 2 lands in the same similar vein. This is Peat Bog. It enters the battlefield with 2 depletion counters on it. And you can tap it and remove a depletion counter to add 2 black to your mana pool. If there are no depletion counters on it, you sacrifice it. There is no way to tap this for mana without removing depletion counters. However, essentially we tend to play this in a way that always keeps at least 1 extra counter on it, so I can forever tap it for double. But it does come in untapped and immediately can tap for 2. And that was the black one. Next one, we have the blue one. Now, give me a second, because I always struggle to say this. It's kind of a ridiculous name. Saprazen Scary. Takes me a second to parse it every time. Same thing, enters the battlefield. They do come in tapped. I always forget about that. I have to read it every time. I have a harder time reading these from the angle I'm at with it under the camera. Enters tapped with 2 depletion counters on it. You can tap it and remove 1 depletion counter to add 2 mana. Again, it's a great way to just get double mana out of your lands, and we're going to proliferate to keep charge counters on it. Or depletion counters. Moving on to charge counters. We have the Thriving Lands, Vivid Marsh, enters battlefield tapped, and with 2 charge counters on it. You can tap it for a black, or you can move a charge counter to add 1 mana of any mana pool. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Then we have the blue version, the Vivid Creek. Same thing, enters tapped with 2 charge counters on it, taps for blue, or you can tap it and remove a charge counter to add 1 mana of any color. And then we have the Monumental Facade. This is a colorless land. It's a sphere, and that's not hugely relevant for us. When it enters battlefield, it enters with 2 oil counters on it. You can tap it to add 1 colorless, or you can tap it and remove an oil counter from this and put it on a target artifact or creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. We talked about a couple different things that care about oil counters, and this is a great way to just transfer continually, because if we're proliferating, we're going to be able to keep doing it over and over. And then we have Aether Hub. I wish I had more of a payoff for this one, but effectively it's just a untapped dual land that we can keep using. It's a land that enters the battlefield. You get 1 energy. You can tap it to add 1 colorless, or you could tap it and pay 1 energy to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. At some point, hopefully I get to put something in that is relevant to energy, but at the moment we don't have anything. Then we have Blast Zone. It enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it, and you can add 1 mana, 1 colorless mana to your mana pool if you tap it, or you could pay XX and tap it and remove X charge counters from it. I'm sorry, add X charge counters on it. Brain is broken. 3 mana, tap it, sacrifice it, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value exactly equal to the number of charge counters on this. So it enters as 1, so you can't do 0 for tokens. However, anything with mana value equal exactly, not equal or less, but equal exactly to the charge counters removed, gets bub-eyed. It's an interesting way to do some sort of board wipe, but we don't typically do a lot of that, but it's an option. And then the last of the counter-esque lands is Karn's Bastion. This taps for colorless, or you could pay 4 mana and tap it to proliferate. And then we have our various different non-basic lands. We have Command Tower, taps for 1 mana of any color in our color identity. And then we have Fetid Pools. This is a typed land. It's an island and a swamp. It cycles for 2, meaning you can pay 2 mana to discard it and draw a card. And it enters the battlefield tapped and can tap for blue or black. And then we have the Contaminated Aquifer. It's also an island and a swamp. And it comes in tapped and it can tap for blue or black. We have Choked Estuary. This enters the battlefield tapped unless you reveal an island or a swamp from your hand. And then it taps for blue or black. And then we have a Watery Grave. This is a shock land. So it's typed. It's an island and a swamp. It taps for blue or black. And it enters the battlefield tapped unless you pay 2 life. Or, yeah, you lose 2 life. So far, the next one is our last of typed lands. We have, besides our basic lands, 4 different lands with a 4, 3, 4, 5, 4. Cannot count. I kept counting Choked Estuary as one of them. I didn't cover Sunken Hollow. We have 5 typed lands to help out that Choked Estuary and anything else that might be relevant. This is a Sunken Hollow. It's an island swamp and enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. This surprisingly happens a lot because I don't have that many basics in this deck. I happen to have a lot of non-basic lands. Then we have our Temple of Deceit. Enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters, you could scry 1, meaning you can look at the top card of your library, choose to put it in the top or bottom, and then it adds 1 blue or black. Mistfault Bridge, tap land. It's an artifact land. It's indestructible, and it taps for blue or black. Drawery Isle, enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters, you gain a life. Taps for blue or black. Dimir Aqueduct, when it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped, and you have to return a land you control to its owner's hand. And this one taps for both blue and black. And then we have the Darkwater Catacombs. This is a filter land, essentially. You have to pay 1 mana to tap it, and then it adds a blue and a black. And then we have Bajuka Bog. It enters tapped. When it enters, you exile target player's graveyard, and it can tap for black. Great graveyard hate. And then we have a card that I don't see enough of anymore, but is still quite relevant. Rogue's Passage. This is a colorless land. or I'm sorry, it taps for colorless. I guess all lands are colorless, so that was a pointless statement. It taps for colorless. That's what I was getting at. And then 4 mana, tap it. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. And then we have Demolition Field. This is land hate. Taps for colorless. Or you can pay 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice it. Destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. That land's controller may search their library for a basic land card and put it on the battlefield and shuffle, and you may do the same thing. So essentially, you trade this and one of their non-basics for you to each get 1 basic. Or for you both, I guess, instead of each player. Buried Ruin. This is land that taps for colorless, or you can pay 2 mana and sacrifice it to return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Thespian Stage, taps for colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it, and it becomes a copy of another land, and it has this ability as well. So you have another land you need to use again, or you have an opponent with a very, very powerful land. Something like a, oh my, what is that called? It's gone, the black mana lands. Tomb of Yawgmoth and Cabal Coffers. So if they have a Tomb of Yawgmoth out and they have a Cabal Coffers, now you also have a Cabal Coffers. Then we have Reliquary Tower. You have no maximum hand size, taps for colorless. And then one of my favorite lands of all time, it's a pet land for me, Westvale Abbey, taps for colorless, or you can pay 5 mana, tap it, pay 1 life, make a 1/1 white and black human creature token. Or you can pay 5 mana, sacrifice 5 creatures, transform it, and untap it. And it becomes Ormondal, the Profane Prince, legendary demon creature. It's a 9/7 with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. So, it doesn't super duper fit, but boy do I love it. And it could be really relevant sometimes, you never know. And then as far as basic lands go, we have 4 islands and 3 swamps. And ladies and gentlemen, that is it. If you liked anything you see here, make sure you check out our YouTube channel itself. It has other decks, and they will be in a playlist. I'll have the list for this deck on Moxfield in the description below. And a bit of gameplay for this can be found on twitch.tv/DircaMonster, as well as many of our other decks. And that's where you can find me pretty much every night of the week. If you liked this, make sure you hit the appropriate button. If you didn't, make sure you hit the other one. If you want to see more content from us, make sure you subscribe. And if you want to see a particular one of my decks, I have all of them, almost all of them, on Moxfield, so you can see that in the description below. And any of them that you want to see, make sure you leave a comment below. The last thing I guess I'll say about this deck is that there are a couple upgrades I plan to get. I just haven't been able to acquire them because everybody's been out when I have the money to buy them. That would be a Lux Cannon, which you could pay 4 mana to put a charge counter on it and tap it and remove 3 charge counters to remove a permanent or destroy a permanent. So effectively, if we get into a combo situation with it, we can destroy all of our opponent's things, including their lands. And then the other one is Darksteel Reactor, which at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a charge counter on it. And then if you have 20 or more on it, you win the game. Great way to basically combo out and proliferate to win the game. That being said, ladies and gentlemen, you've been absolutely wonderful. I'm a Dirca Monster, but let's be honest with you. Fuck this shit, I'm out, I guess. That's the stream outro. Oh well, it works here. Boy.